So this session, different from some of the other sessions you've been in, is a dialogue. So as much as you can come closer, get tighter seats, that would be wonderful. The topic that we're working on this afternoon is the race for resilient cities. Right? How are we winning the race against natural disasters, environmental challenges? Right? So right off the bat, who thinks we're winning the race? Okay, we're going to have a good conversation. Right now, we're not even winning the race for people's attention with every other thing happening at 2 o'clock. We're not even racing, right? And so the people that we have in the room are those that are committed to figuring this out, right? To choose this over everything else that's going on, to pay attention to an important long-term issue is our work. And so that's our challenge for the conversation today, okay? And we know that resiliency is of many forms. There's ecological resiliency, right? There's financial, there's social. And there's people in this room doing amazing work on all of those. And we know that working in any one of those silos is not enough. One of the things that I love about CGI when you introduce people is they all say, I'm here working at the intersection or the nexus between poverty and environment, right? Or I'm working at the intersection between ecology and commerce, right? So that's great. So we understand there are connections. And we also understand there are not enough people in this room who are working and thinking about this. And so I hope for this conversation for the next hour or so we can have a real conversation. In these formats, there's a default where people stand up and they say, here's who I am, here's what I do, and isn't it great? We need to wrestle with more than what's great and what's working now, but how we can come together. So I really invite you in this conversation, what do the people in this room need to hear and understand? What we'll have in a moment is four people share some of their cases and some of the lessons learned. They'll take each about 7-8 minutes, and then we're going to turn it back to us. The conversation of how do we get more people in this room next time? What do we need to do differently? And what would success look like in winning this race? Okay? We'll come back at the end, hear some closing remarks. But again, the work of this session is your work. I'm going to help moderate it. But it's really your work. Okay? So first up, I'd love to invite Winnie Byanyima, right? The Executive Director of Oxfam International. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. I'm pleased to represent Oxfam International here as an organization that works on building resilience over the long term. I'd like to do 3 things this afternoon. First, I'll give you a brief overview of Oxfam's approach to meeting the challenge of strengthening community resilience. Second, I'll tell you about Oxfam's CGI commitment, the R4 Rural Resilience Initiative, an innovative project in Senegal, and a great example of our resilience approach to partnership. And finally, I'll speak frankly about the challenges we've faced and some of the lessons we've learned, and hopefully they'll help you in your own strategies and plans. Resilience is very much a buzzword. I hear it everywhere. And one Mozambican woman I met somewhere in Mozambique asked me, she said, Winnie, when the floods hit Cabo Delgado and a woman runs, pregnant woman runs, climbs a tree and gives birth from the top of the tree, is that what you call resilience? She was challenging. So resilience for us means helping communities not only to survive shocks and stresses, but to thrive in spite of them. This means reducing underlying vulnerabilities, and this can only be done if we tackle inequality, redistribute risk, and stop risk dumping. Risks are on the increase, but we have to ask ourselves, why are people vulnerable? People are vulnerable because they are politically, socially, or economically excluded. And consistently, we see a relationship between income inequality and greater vulnerability of populations. So risk for us is, we see it as being dumped on poor people. Rich countries reap the economic rewards of pumping carbon into the atmosphere. Land grabs force poor farmers off their land, and market speculation is causing fuel and food prices which hurt the poor the most. So inequality and power have a very important part to play in risk and vulnerability. And while global poverty is declining, inequality is not. So, our commitment. Successful resilience building programs look at the underlying factors for people's vulnerability and at the range of risks that they face. Our project, the R4 Rural Resilience Initiative, is one such project, and it is our CGI commitment. We partnered with the UN World Food Programme to launch R4 in 2010 in Ethiopia, and following our success there, we have now launched it in Senegal in 2011. It combines 4 risk management strategies for farmers: savings, credit, insurance, and resource management, natural resource management. The key innovation in R4 is that it gives poor farmers who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford financial services an opportunity to pay for insurance premiums in labor rather than in cash. Participants work to improve the ability of their land to withstand climate shocks through small-scale community projects that they have identified themselves, such as improved irrigation or soil management, and this enables them to pay for their insurance premiums. It's a win-win. R4 has already reached over 20,000 households in Ethiopia, and we are rolling it out in Senegal, as I said. The methodology is proven. We've seen results. Farmers' yields had increased by 57% more than the farmers who didn't have this, who benefit from this program. And we have also been able to pay farmers when drought hit them. So when farmers are able to manage their risk, they are more able to take smart risks, which allow them to invest more in their farms, have higher yields, and improve their incomes. We plan to roll it out to 1.5 million people by 2016. So this program is built on effective partnerships at global, national, and local levels, and it's also rooted in tackling power imbalances. In terms of partnerships at the global level, we partnered, as I said, with the World Food Programme and a private sector company, Swiss Re. At the national level, R4 cannot work without having government policies that support it. So we work with government to put the policies in place that will enable the private sector to provide financial services and that will protect the rights of poor farmers. At the local level, R4 works in each community with civil society, community-based groups, and farming organizations. We can't implement this without working with local partners. So this is a picture of one of the farmers. No time to tell you her story. I'd have loved to. So in terms of tackling power imbalances, R4 shifts power by identifying, engaging, and influencing powerful actors, particularly governments and the private sector. And communities now have some tools to hold their governments and the private sector accountable to them on their commitments. Specifically, R4 recognizes that some individuals have less power than others. So we engage with disabled people, female-headed households, other marginal groups specifically, looking at their particular needs and ensuring that they have an equal voice in the decision-making at the community level on these programs. We consult them. Sometimes it means having quotas for these groups on the committees, the leadership committees for this project, or making sure that we hold meetings at the times when women have the time to attend the meetings and so on, Challenges, lessons learned. We've seen farmers try to manage their risks informally without success. By providing formal insurance and educating farmers on the risks and benefits, we have the potential to build resilience. Second, we need a good legal environment, as I said. We work with government to provide this, protect farmers' rights, and enable the private sector to invest. Third, weather-indexed insurance requires reliable weather data, which is not always available. So fourth, understanding household dynamics, and particularly gender dynamics, is crucial for the empowerment of people. So at Oxfam, we have found that when women participate, it's not enough. It's important to address the fundamental issues of inequality at the household level. And that's when you can have lasting change. Lastly, we've also learned that the program... Okay, all right, I get the point. It takes a long time to do this. You have to go in for the long haul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, I don't want to cut her short, but I want to get to the conversation. And if the implications of what Winnie's talking about are significant, can we create insurance products for all of the vulnerabilities and increasing risks that people are under? Right? Can we redistribute risk and the inequality standards that we have now? Right? And can we have the quality of partnerships that it's insisted on in a legal framework in a private sector to get there? Again, there's so much in that's just 3 things in what she said, but what we have to contend with in this conversation. Let's get 2 more speakers and then we'll generate some thoughts ourselves. Next up, Zhang Xingchen, the president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all you distinguished colleagues coming here. I know that this is a case study. It means that you all like action, not just ideas. So I'd like to share directly with you the case that I'm representing, the IUCN. You know that IUCN was born in 1948, which was a year when I was born. So that is why I raised for the election for this presidency last year, because I want to raise for this global challenge for all our human beings and our planet. So I would directly point to the case of the mangrove. Mangrove for the Future is a partnership-based coastal community resilient initiative working in over 10 countries across the Indian Ocean region. Mangrove are not only coastal ecosystem program works on, but it is chosen as a flagship ecosystem because it illustrates so clearly the essential links between healthy natural ecosystem and also human well-being. Growing in very tight nature ecosystem and forest, mangrove are well known to provide a vital nature buffer against the storms and other nature hazards. In the warm and bracing water, among the safety of their root system, we find a perfect nursery for many species of commercial fish and shellfish that provide food and a livelihood, security to otherwise vulnerable coastal dwellers. Mangroves are also recognized as one of the most effective carbon sinkers, providing significant benefits in efforts to mitigate climate change. Yet, in 1980, the fifth of mangroves around the world has been lost through a conversion to shrimp farming, agriculture and urban industry and tourism uses, which happen in many countries, even in my country in China, that kind of cases. And we are still losing about 1% every year. For many tropical countries, mangroves are insurance policy as Alexander just told us, on which the premium simply has been paid. The value of the mangrove and other coastal ecosystem was brought sharply into focus, unfortunately, not until the year December 26th of 2004. That off the west coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, the third largest ever recorded earthquake produced a tsunami that devastated coastal communities across Indian Ocean. Waves up to 30 meters high swept across the region, killing 230,000 people in 14 countries. It was one of the deadliest nature disasters in recorded history of a human being. The world responded with unprecedented outpouring of some $14 billion for humanitarian aid. But tsunami also revealed deeper problems. We must come to think about it, ladies and gentlemen. Over the past 200 years of the Industrial Revolution, we human beings just believe there is no limitation of these natural resources, ecosystem. There is no limitation for all the resources, plus that we have technology innovation. But now, nature punishes us, as Hegel and Engels said that 100 years ago. When we human beings conquer the nature, we enjoy the benefits of that. But when we conquer it second times, we have been punished, unfortunately. Now, we remember that last year, the Hurricane Sandy, right, make even Wall Street here flooded with 1 or 2 meters, right? So that is why tsunami also reveal deeper problem. Coastal area were already fragile from decades of mangrove clearing, damage of the coral reef, overfishing, and pollution. Building back was President Clinton's call to action. Clinton's, yes, please. Next slide. To action at the time when he served as a UN Special Envoy for Tsunami Recovery. Mangroves for Future was designed to do exactly that. In the year of 2006, IUCN and the UNDP, along with the government and the civil society, representatives from 6 countries, and additional 4 institutional partners joined together to launch Mangroves for Future, an Indian Ocean-wide coastal initiative supported by SIDA, NORAD, and DANIDA. Over the years, Mangrove for Future has grown to include more than 10 countries with a focus to build a long-term resilience for coastal community, with hundreds of local projects that address human needs and protect nature system, extensive knowledge and learning platform, and increasing the policy focus. It is delivering results across the region. Excuse me, Alexander, how many minutes I still have?
There's a little clock right here.
Okay,
About
so
a minute.
only 1 minute. Okay, let me jump up. At a global policy level, IUCN is facilitating a decision by the member of the countries of Mangrove for the Future to enter into a global mangrove alliance. Once realized, this alliance will create invaluable knowledge linkage between those countries across the world. And in many ways, Mangroves for Future challenges key assumptions. Firstly, by recognizing that the well-being and resilience of human communities is strongly dependent on the health of the natural ecosystem. Secondly, by taking a transboundary, truly regional approach, it challenges countries to work together towards common shared objectives. Thirdly, by building partnership into its DNA, it effectively links the governments, civil society, and the private sectors, which is very important. And I remember this lunch, President Clinton asked us, well, we have committed, we have action. And what do you do what will be your choice? And this is also my question. Fortunately, 5 years ago, when I stepped down from deputy minister, I started to have an initiative of Eco Forum Global. Now it has grown into China's largest platform, commonly shared by all the stakeholders. I welcome you not only to IUCN, but also let's join hands, work together, and welcome to my forum. Thank you.
So that's a powerful idea that we're being punished, right? What's also interesting in that idea is who is paying the price and who's being punished. Because we know that those who receive the consequence of the instability are those that are most vulnerable. And there's been a lot of talk at CGI about the gains made in poverty alleviation and what would it cost to lose those gains. And so the other question that comes up quite clearly is how are we going to value mangroves over every other economic and social pressure that these families and shrimp farmers have on that same land? Right? Again, a lot to think about. Let's get one more group up. Mark Newton, Timothy Georges from Timberland and Trees for the Future.
Hi, I'm Mark Newton from Timberland, and this is my partner, Timothée Georges, from the Smallholder Farmers Alliance in Haiti. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about something small and talk about how important it is to be thinking small in order for the success to happen. We're going to talk to you a little bit about a project that we have going on in Haiti. We're going to talk to you why we're doing it, some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the challenges that we see, and some takeaways that I think those of you that are out here that are thinking about making a difference, that are engaged in partnerships like this, might be able to walk away from, even if it has nothing to do with Haiti. I'm from Timberland. We're a boot company. So, so why would we be doing something like this? We've been actually in the area, in the Dominican Republic, on the island, manufacturing for over 20 years. It's our only owned and operated factory that we have. We have other factories that we contract in other parts of the world, but that's where we are, and that's where we've been for a long time, and our employees are there. And we really want to make a difference in this place. I'm really fortunate. I'm so lucky. I have the best job at Timberland, and Timberland's a great company. The idea of Timberland is to do well and to do good, and the business is all about trying to help our customers make a difference in the world with the products that we have for them. And Timberland, there's timber in the word. And it's a tree for a logo. So, why wouldn't we be planting trees? It's something that it seems obvious. But why would you just go off and plant trees to try to make a difference if you're not thinking about how those trees can make a difference? And you're not thinking about the communities that those trees are going into. So really, the commitment that we have is on the island of Haiti, where the Dominican Republic is half of. Who's been to Haiti? Next time any of you go, but the next time those of you who have been, when you fly in, you can tell the difference between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. How can you tell the difference? The tree line. There's only 2% of the original forest left in Haiti. It's crazy. And the trees do more than just provide shelter. They hold the land. And with the devastating impacts that we've seen to our climate, and the extreme weather events that we've seen. We talk about the devastation of some of the hurricanes that have come through here recently, but they often go through there first. And just recently, there's been a huge issue with runoff of the soil. So we need to stabilize the land, and we need to make it possible for the farmers that are there to be able to be economically successful. So we have to think about it both in terms of the economy. We have to think about the infrastructure and the land, and we also have to think about how we can help with these folks have a sustainable livelihood. So our project was really to create at a small scale model that we call Exit Strategy 8, which is to go in, create a partnership, fund the partnership so that we can get it off the ground, and when we move on, the partnership lives on. And essentially we're looking to create these nurseries. And with these nurseries, we find they become community centers. So one of the biggest challenges, that we find when we went into this was really around how we could actually make a difference and how we could use our seed funding in a way so that these partnerships could continue forward. Timote, what did you find as some of the challenges?
Thank you for having me here. First, let me clarify a little bit. I'm representing the foundation of Smallholder Farmers Alliance in this session. And challenges start with deforestation, obviously, that drives soil erosion, inundation, and weak agricultural production, and finally, poverty. These are the challenges we are tackling right now in Haiti. The lesson I learned from that is we need to change approach. Like having bottom-up approach instead of coming to the community saying, people, we need to do this for you, and this is the project ideas we come to implement for you. And we need to shift this to having people participate at the decision-making level and let them be part of the planning, and listening to them instead of talking to them, imposing them your project ideas. That will be some alternatives to have success. And also, I learned from my experience in tree planting in Haiti that money cannot engage people. And also, we need to start small because most of the time, big changes start very small. Thank you.
Well, what we found also is that if the people are not in the community is not part of not just not just recipients of aid, they have to be part of the development of the project. They have to feel like they own the project, and they have to feel like they're part of the solution. And so that is a key part, is actually bringing it down to that level. And I think we find this at both levels. We find this at a micro level in the community when we're engaging in communities like this, but we also find it at a national, international level too. If we're, for instance, if we're trying to funnel for great purpose money into Haiti to solve a lot of their problems, but we're not engaging the government, engaging the agencies, having them own the problem and the solution, then when we step away, they're not functional enough to be able to take it forward. So those are the things that we've learned, I think, the most. The last thing I want to leave you with are really sort of the key takeaways. And so the first thing is around this idea of exit strategy aid. This is really a new concept. It's a paradigm shift, which allows you, and you have to allow cycles of learning. You have to allow time for innovation to occur and the occasional setback. But the whole point is that when you move into a situation, you want to be able to move out and have it keep going. The second is, as Timote pointed out, avoid the temptation to overfund too early in the process. You have to allow the infrastructure to establish itself before it can really take root and move forward and you can really scale effectively. The third is this idea of a social business model really beginning to take hold. This is an idea where you can't just focus on the economics. You just can't focus on the environment. You just can't focus on the livelihoods. You have to think about all three. You have to engage all parts of the problem in order to be successful with any one part. And then lastly, let's just keep in mind that smallholder farmers are a huge part of the solution. In Haiti, they're 60% of the available jobs. They represent 60% of the population, essentially, and about a quarter of the GDP. So if we're not thinking about this at a very micro level, with the farmers on the ground, with the people in the small communities, then we're not solving the big problems. Thank you very much.
Great. So, your thoughts, perspectives. What would it take to win? Even at the micro level, it's pretty complicated, right? There's a lot of enthusiasm now about community-led resilience until companies and people discover they have to give up control, decision-making, and learn a lot that they didn't want to learn about. So how are we going to do this? What do you think? Yes. Mike's coming to you, right here. Thanks.
Thanks. Alex Eaton from Mexico. I work for the International Renewable Resources Institute. And it seems like these themes here in resiliency have an intersection at changing how we value resources. Right now, I think that this conversation ties into this idea of a nutrient economy, where you're actually building up savings within forests, within soils, within seed banks. At our level, we use animals and small farms as a type of savings for small farmers, and allowing them to think about soils in a long term rather than short-term sales of products and agricultural goods. If you think about also, that's sort of pushes towards chemical fertilizers. If you can develop organic fertilizers and things that help build the soil over the long term, that's a type of savings plan that can be implemented. But we have a short-term economic gain.
So how do you convince them to do that? How do you get people out of short-term thinking to value that when they have real needs in the short term?
I think these examples of resilience are really a key piece of that, because when you see cycles where maybe you have a few good years, but then you have really bad years, it's about learning and building from those really bad examples of showing that soils and agricultural resilience really needs to be the basis as communities grow.
Okay, great. Other thoughts? Yeah. The middle section here.
Thank you. Ian Ross from Hugginsure, as of this morning. I think the word resilience is a bit misleading. When natural catastrophes strike, there's nothing that's resilient. And we've seen that globally. We've seen it in man-made catastrophes. We've seen it Katrina, hurricanes, etc. So having a discussion on resilience in a rural farming area when a hurricane comes through is really, we're not going to build a resilient farm for a hurricane. So we need to think of the methodologies that we use in the developed world to overcome resilience, which are financial. And to a large degree, whilst financial inclusion in the context of providing small insurance policies to individual farmers is right, it's laudable, it's a great progress, it does not provide resilience. Most of the time, actually, the proceeds of those policies go to pay the people that supplied the seed. The farmer finds himself back where he came to. So if we're going to talk about resilience in the context of catastrophes, we need to have new dynamics. And we need to think what happens in our lives. In this room, irrespective of whatever policies you buy in your personal capacity, whether you buy a motor car or for your home or whatever, I could name you 24 other insurance policies which are applying to your lives right now. The building goes down here because of an earthquake, you're insured, but you didn't buy it. If there's an earthquake in Haiti, you're not insured, but you didn't buy anything there either. So we need to think how financial markets, particularly global insurance markets and catastrophe markets, can enter this space of social impact.
What would it take for them to enter this space? Right?
Well, I think what it needs to do is, first of all, to calculate the impact that has on the more developed part of society. It's a fallacy to believe that because damage occurred in an area where they are uninsured, that it has no impact on the insured. If we take Mozambique, Hurricane Jaffet went through Mozambique a few years ago. It was a catastrophe, but in terms of revenue to the developed portion of Mozambique, the loss to the insurance market was a few $1 million. The human suffering was huge, but the resilient financial loss to the economy was then in millions of dollars. So we need to think of the impact of this suffering on the economies and find ways to indemnify the uninsured, to find new ways for financial inclusion other than selling a poor farmer a tiny policy. If every rural farmer in the world paid 50% of his salary or his earnings to a policy, it still would not cover one natural catastrophe.
Yes. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I have a recommendation. I'm Patrick Fine from FHI 360. The idea of figuring out some insurance instruments that could be used in poor communities is really an attractive notion, but nobody has really figured out how to do it very well except for a few agricultural insurance schemes. So maybe my recommendation to you is to make this the challenge in the Holt contest next year and have those MBA schools put their creativity and innovation into coming up with some insurance instruments that would be workable in the kind of context that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. The whole prize can pick what they're interested in. They're not interested in this yet.
Well,
so how would we
convince
get,
them? You can.
So how,
but I have a.
how would we? No, but I think the question is, how would we get them interested? How do we get the interest and creativity? Because the idea that we have to build some metrics, and if we understand the size of the problem, that would work, right? What would it take for them to be? This is the top thing we want to look at. Yeah.
Get another prize funded.
Who's going to fund the prize? Why would they fund this prize over other prizes, right? That's what we're trying to, how do we get more attention to this? Over here, we had a comment. It's coming, the mic's coming to you.
Jorge Camil from Mexico. I think the problem is they'll stop taking down trees, they'll stop fishing sharks, they'll stop doing all of these things when you can replace that with other income. And from now, what I think that has worked the best is a long-term sort of ecotourism strategy. So what I think we need to do now is involve both government, the social sector, and the private companies at a bigger scale, as well as the problem with a lot of these countries is they don't have the right forces to make sure that the forests aren't being taken down. But the problem from the community perspective is I'll stop taking down a tree when you give me the same amount of money somewhere else. So someone has to put that money in that gap so you can do it. The only one I've seen is ecotourism, which takes a long time to develop.
Sure. How many people in this room have been an eco-tourist in the last 2 years? Okay. Why'd you do that?
Well, because it was a way to contributing as you enjoyed yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
But and to learn. I think also just to add, no, I have
Please.
a microphone.
Can't help yourself. Yeah.
I think a couple things are, you talk about motivating people to act and the race and the urgency of the issue. I think part of it also is that when people go through these events, it's when they're most aware of the event and what they have to do, and it challenges their way of thinking about things, and they think more creatively about transformation and doing things different.
Right.
So how do we get people to see a vision of the different scenarios before they're affected by it and inspire them to act? And I think there's a lot going on. I know that IBM's experimenting with different new software to gather data and present it in a way that you can anticipate weather events and its effects 3 or 4 weeks in advance. So that kind of information could be very helpful. But we need to inspire people to act by showing them what the risks are, I think.
Okay. Comment behind you. You want to add to that?
I'd like to follow up because we had a brief conversation before the session started. My name is Jules Kortenhurst. I'm Dutch, and I moved 3 weeks ago from the Netherlands to Boulder, Colorado. In the Netherlands, we are well used to rain. We know how to deal with it. And the difficulty that George and I were discussing is that it takes such out-of-the-box thinking to envision the completely unexpected, to expect the black swan, to think in the fat tail risk. And it was striking because as I was actually relatively unimpacted, my wife and my son were sandbagging for our neighbor who had built a very, very resilient house and almost like a survivalist setting, but had never thought of the possibility that Boulder would be confronted with flooding. So the challenge that George lays out is how can we think ahead, but also how can we think about the unexpected? Because the reality of climate change is that we will be confronted with things that we cannot expect.
Yeah, there's a large portion of this community that believes that if we had better data and we had better weather predictive models, that we would be able to fix a portion of this, right? And so what's the investment there that it would take? Yeah, come on. Then I'll come over here.
Well, my name's Amy Lehman. I work on Lake Tanganyika, which is one of the most important places on the planet that no one knows anything about. So come and ask me about it afterwards. Yeah. And not to be a super downer person, but I think that we might be screwed because there are a number of things that we're talking about all the time that I think are in natural conflict with one another. Like here at the Clinton Global Initiative, we talk about scaling and size and all that kind of stuff and how important that is. And yet in a condition of the unknown in the future, the organizations that can survive are really small, nimble ones. So if there's some unanticipatable shock, and I think we're understanding that that's going to happen more and more and more, small is beautiful, but bigger is always better. And then we think about, okay, how are we going to think about the future? This idea of how do you plan for 20 or 50 years into the future, which is kind of what we have to do. And yet if we look across all of the sectors that are also represented here, I can only really think of one sector that is vilified, right, in the environmental space and in other spaces. I'm an NGO. It's the extractives industry. Right? They're the only ones that actually plan for 20 to 50 year cycles because of the incredible capital investment that has to take place before they hit their inflection point and start making hand over fist with their extraction, whether it's minerals or oil or whatever. So all of the multilateral projects and large foundations and stuff, the funding cycle for those people is like 2 to 5 years. 5 years is a long grant in this world. So I just want to understand, how are we going to resolve all these sort of fundamental theoretical conflicts about how we even look at the world?
Right. Sure. And coming back to how do we avoid short-termism and the pressures of that. But even in your comments is the conflict between being small and large, right? And we know that if we have all the small pieces, the whole thing doesn't optimize. So that's the challenge. Yes, you've been waiting to say something.
Michael Berkowitz from Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities. So I just go back to this comment about Boulder and the previous comment. And in some ways, we need to know how to talk about resilience, because talking about resilience is also talking about the risk that you face. And we need to know how to do that better. I mean, I would say Boulder's not a black swan event. There's been 7 in the last century. There are 7 big floods in Boulder. The last one was in 1969, and the town knew very well. And the city of Boulder did really amazing flood control things, actually. They created runoffs using bike lanes and multi-use paths. They created some floodgates and so on. But they didn't communicate that well enough to the residents. So the residents were shocked to find that Boulder Creek actually flooded. And so it's how do we talk about risk and resilience? And I think public health provides some of the good answers. And public health, through their anti-smoking campaigns and their diet and healthy lifestyle and all of those things, has figured out how to talk about risk that we face and all the dynamics of precaution advocacy. And so I think we need to have a real think about how we talk about resilience and what that means.
And what's the hard part of talking about risk? Why are people threatened or uncomfortable with that part of the conversation?
So in a previous life, I worked for the Office of Emergency Management in New York, and I was the project manager on a hurricane planning effort in the 90s. And so we spent a lot of time going through at-risk communities in the Rockaways and Staten Island and so on. And when you talk about the risks of hurricanes impacting New York, low frequency, high impact events, you're talking about people's property values and their lifestyles and the homes that they grew up in. And I've done a lot of sessions in the Rockaways where I either got shouted out of the room or laughed out of the room or just treated with indifference.
Right. And you were bringing what was said before, the weather patterns, the data, the argument, right? You had all that.
Right. I had the science, but and for a leader, a mayor or a governor, to communicate to people that we may not be able to help you. You're going to have, you need to take some steps and make some choices that make you and our community more resilient. That's a really bold thing for mayors to do in the absence of events that remind us. And so how do we get the mayors to take those steps is a difficult thing, but one clearly that we need to do.
Yeah. Comment in the back, yeah.
Hi, well, I'm from the Rockaways.
Okay.
How are you doing?
I just moved back after a year. My name's Lori Meadoff, and usually I say, and I am this and this and that, but right now I was the victim. And it was very funny that everyone was like, Clinton's coming out, you want to volunteer? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm on the other side this time. A few things. One thing that I learned, and that's after being Miss Volunteer for umpteen years, really what I needed, and that's watching my neighborhood that I grew up in burn down in 4 different fires, and just pure shock, 9 feet of the floods coming up, the whole thing, and petrified. Was afterwards, I just needed someone to say, hey, Lori, how you doing? And instead, everyone was lined up. And I just think there's first response, but there's a thing called second response. And I think that's some of what the conversation is. Some kind of strategy, because people are in shock. And I didn't know whether to call FEMA or the insurance, or like there was no cell phone, and everybody was just frozen while, you were at beachfront property because everything was at your doorstep. So that was one really big thing. The whole theme of helping, all of a sudden people were giving clothes. And then it became my problem to get rid of the clothes because the church had shut down. There wasn't strategy. And even with FEMA, all of a sudden you're at a meeting and they say, you got to lift your house 15 feet. You kidding me? How? Where? And there's not, again, with all of this, a strategy of where people are, begin from where they are. They're in shock. How are we addressing that? 2, consistent government, private sector, philanthropy strategy. And I know that the Center for Prevention and Philanthropy in Washington, what Lori Berkman's trying to do is trying to look at some of that too. But I think that there is such disconnect after being through it on all of these things. And worldwide, and as this gets more and more, there has to be a real emotional response to the people. And Rubicon was amazing. That group was just amazing. But people are in shock. They need to get help. And we need to think very differently about what actually is happening. And if everybody's seen the movie called Climate Refugees, you need to go on Netflix and look at it because it explains what's happening.
So what's your strategy now that you moved back?
I got Spike TV to redo Bungalow Bar on their bar rescue. So the Bungalow Bar, my fireman's thing, has just been redone as a bar. Rockaway is resilient. It's mostly cops and firemen, and they are resilient. But my question really is, why if we knew this was the storm of the century and 75% of us, me included, stayed, if I knew, or many of us knew, that our electricity was going to be turned off and that gas was going to be turned off for 10 days, half those people, or more than half, would go out. That's what I mean about some strategies. They didn't believe it because Irene didn't affect us. We thought it would. So step by step, little by little, it's really rough. It was Afghanistan for a long time. It still is. And, there's a dispersed still dialogue going on, not one real vision of protection. And they're building big walls and big, dunes right now, and rain the other day, and I was shaking because I think it's going to be non-effective.
It's fascinating because I assume when you went to those communities, you had some of that data and you said, this is what's going to happen, right? We're going to turn off the electricity. You'll be without power. You'll be without the data. So I think this question of meet people where they are is really complicated because where people are survivalists in the way they know how to live now, right? There's somewhat short-term thinking and they can be stubborn. I'm stubborn, right? And so what does it take to overcome that? Because people love their homes and love how they've learned to survive. Right. So what are we finding that's working? Yes, comment.
Yeah, Bob Goff, Intertribal Council on Utility Policy. Spent the last decade in Boulder, and we could see it coming.
You weren't surprised?
No. It's happened in the Big Thompson, and you just need it. Yeah. And what people aren't connecting with the climate is, well, this kind of rainfall can happen. Yes, but it's after 5 years of having your forests burned down in the areas that used to hold water. And then they're not there to do that. It just multiplies over the years. It's not a single event. Climate change is not a single event. It's that constellation. But Hawaii, the Big Island, had a tsunami in 1946. A whole school, all the young kids were lost because the teachers who were not from there didn't know about tsunamis, took the kids down to the beach to watch this amazing thing. The sea was pulling out. Then the sea came back and took them all away. That community, losing that generation, decided they were never going to forget it. And what they do is every year have a music festival on the site. And to have that music festival for 4 days, people need to bring tents, bring food, do everything you need to do in terms of the community, and they talk about what happened, they talk about the nature of their community. They practice relocating every year on that site. And 6 years ago, with the tsunami in American Samoa, there was concern. They relocated it up above ground. They were ready for it. They knew it can happen again. And they make it part of their daily life, not something that you wait for a government flyer or announcement or that kind of thing.
You should bring them to the Rockaways. There's a comment up here in the second row. Come back to you in a second.
Hi, Dana Borland with the JPB Foundation, and you know, one of the things we're starting our environment program, and we are at the intersection of health, poverty, and the environment, but looking for ways to enable resilient communities that positively impact the health and well-being of natural and human systems, particularly in low-income communities. And I think maybe
that's a lot.
It is a lot. I got it in there though.
You did.
And what I think maybe because we're solution focused in this room. But the word shock and what you were just describing, I'm not sure what the solution is to this, but some of it is that we forget, particularly in low-income communities, but I would say sort of writ large, that there is a certain amount of shock that has already taken place, that we have, you know, put highways through communities and decimated them. We've pulled out manufacturing. You know, there are things that have happened over time in communities, and there's a certain amount of shock that's already in place even before a weather-related event. And so how do we listen, as the gentleman from Haiti was saying, to communities' history and to start repairing some of that fabric in communities with people, rather than coming in automatically with the engineering and the design solutions? And I know it takes a lot of time to do that.
So how are you listening, right? How do we actually get good data from people who have been shocked, tried events, you know, tried talking about it before? How are you listening? How does that work?
Yeah, and you know, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily doing it, but I think it is having conversations, and some of those are happening right now in New York with the Rebuild by Design competition that HUD is leading with President Obama's task force, and we really are just sitting down around tables and drinking coffee and listening and hearing people's stories that may start with how they fared through Sandy, but they go immediately back to things that have happened in the past and why they didn't trust government to tell them, you know, that when they were told to leave and why they didn't leave. And you begin to start unraveling kind of where they're at. But that takes time. It's not terribly sexy.
Yeah, but part also why it takes time is because then you have a whole bunch of assumptions that get tested. So, Carlos, you want to add something on that? Okay.
I'm Carlos Dominguez with Cisco. You know, it's kind of interesting. I'm learning here immensely. So I'm the novice, but you know what I do for a living is solve problems. So as I've heard everyone talk, there's actually, in a very simple way, three major categories. One is pre-event, right? Historical data that we've got predictions that we knew back there that this was going to happen. You know, and then the notion becomes, how do you convince the community to do something different? And, you know, we're fighting the fact that humans by nature don't like change, right? But there's a lot of change management. There's a lot of things that we can do to evoke, you know, that. The second piece is actually, and that's the preparation side. Second piece is really while the event is going on, right? What are the emergency measurements? How do you keep people safe? You know, and all the things there. And I think for the most part, we as communities tend to do that very well when there's emergencies. And then the third component is the post stuff. How do you do the recovery? The insurance issue that you brought up and some of the problems that you kind of tackled. And I think having this very linear look at the multiple steps that occur and trying to find solutions for each one of them is clearly, I think, one of the ways to get to a problem where you kind of come to a resolution.
And where's the biggest gap? Yeah, of those three sections. Where, if we were going to invest in one of those three categories, would we spend some of our time? Yeah. Comment?
Hi, Amina Ali from Earth Networks. We've been talking a lot about weather and data, and that is our focus. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is how do you improve the quality of the warnings? How do you scale the infrastructure to countries where there is no infrastructure? If you don't have electricity, you certainly don't have weather information. And so what I think you really need is to think out of the box in terms of what can you learn from the mobile revolution, from the prevalence of cell phone towers. how can advances in sensor technology help do this, and how can you ultimately leverage all of these mobile phones, 6 billion mobile phones that are there to disseminate information in a very different way. So that's one of the things that, you know, we're focused on in terms of public-private partnerships to do that. But simply put, you got to do things differently than the way you have before, because the world's a different place.
There's a mic. Come back to you next.
Thank you so much. My name is Petra Nemkova. I'm founder of a charity called Happy Hearts Fund, and we focus on rebuilding schools after natural disasters. And I just have a few comments and on some of the great sharings. We work in 7 countries, and what I find, personally, I was in a tsunami in 2004. I was lucky to survive, so I have a first-hand experience, and then also the second response through the last 7 years of my work. What I find that people always think that it doesn't impact me. The disaster will happen somewhere else, but it doesn't impact me. And I was yesterday at a conference about earthquakes in Canada, and one of the things was we cannot predict earthquakes. It's impossible. It's the science. It's very hard to predict them. So how now the good news is that through the recent natural disasters, everybody's more aware of them. 5 years, let's say 7 years, 5 years ago, that's 10 years ago, there was much less talk about natural disasters. So how do what we can do? I'll go back to Hawaii, the preparedness. There's another story of a little girl, 10 years girl called Tilly Smith, and she was from England, she was in Thailand, and because of seeing the first warning signs of a tsunami, she saved the whole beach, more than 100 people. Education, that preparedness through education. If we would know how to recognize natural disasters, what to do, it would save many, many lives. Here or internationally, but it's not put into educational system. Awareness campaigns like for health, you were saying, if there are awareness campaigns of what to do when natural disasters happen, how you recognize them, many lives could be saved. So that's, I think there is the good news is that there's a lot of asks, what we can do, how we can prepare it personally, our cities and so on. And the question is how we can prepare and save lives, but also the sustained response. It's a huge problem. There's a huge lack of sustained response. First responders come, they leave, and communities are forgotten. That's something to be addressed too.
Yeah. Both parts are real challenges. How do you get their attention in the first place, right? How do you get people to understand that this affects them, and then how do you sustain attention, right? At the CGI mid-year meeting, this was disaster relief, which is another spin on this, was the big topic, right? And now attention falls. And so how do you get people to sustain their attention? You wanted to say something a bit ago. Yeah.
I don't know how big, but we'll see. My name is Zach Rosenberg from the St. Bernard Project. We have an entity that we've created called Disaster Recovery Lab that focuses on 2 things. One, before disaster, the goal is to help communities understand and mitigate their risk in relation to homeowners and small and mid-sized businesses. After disaster, to make sure that communities have a prompt, efficient, and predictable path to recovery by having a standardized approach. It was sad to hear the woman from the Rockaways talking, because the way that you feel is exactly the way that people in Colorado felt, the way that people in Joplin felt, the way New Orleans felt. And I think in America, at least, that we haven't accepted that there has to be one standardized way that stands on the shoulder. Disaster recovery has to stand on the shoulder of the recovery that's preceded it. And we've got to not pump our chests all the time and talk about what worked, but we got to look inward, what didn't work, and then how are we going to standardize the approach forward. And so I guess a question or a challenge to the room is I think we've got to celebrate successes. Of course we do. But at the same time, we've got to be comfortable talking about failure, what hasn't worked, why didn't it work. And at these things, it's great. People are doing incredible things. You don't want to de-incentivize taking chances. But at the same time, I think we've got to admit what's not working and together come up with solutions.
So what's the largest thing that's not working?
Domestically and post-disaster recovery, the culture is wrong. We think that the culture silos the recovery and is too satisfied. And again, this is just domestically. Right. Is far too satisfied with keeping fidelity to process that's existed for so long rather than progress and trying new things. So I think we've got to tweak the culture a little bit, and we've got to standardize the approach.
Okay. Other thoughts? Tweaking the culture a little bit sounds like it'd be tweaked a lot. Yeah, there's a comment in the back. Red shirt, yeah.
My name is Gasari Chife with the Chife Foundation, working in Eastern Nigeria. I think for me, I'd just like to share an experience. Last year, as I was leaving the CGI, I was getting all these phone calls from the communities we work with. And basically what happened was the Cameroonian government decided to open 2 dams because of heavy rainfall and released a massive amount of water, which went down the Niger River and flooded 7 states. We, in the communities we work with, had 50,000 people displaced for about 4 to 5 months. We had a lot of loss of life upriver. Luckily for us, only 1. But I think close to 200-300 people died. There were absolutely no warnings. This isn't like an unforeseen event that happened without, by nature. This is something that was released by a government. And I just could not wrap my head around the fact that these communities were not warned. The water was released in the night. People died in their sleep. No accountability from the Cameroonian government. The Nigerian government blamed them. They blamed the Nigerian government. And people died. People lost everything. They already have nothing. And we worked for months, to feed these people, take care of them. No assistance from government, no assistance from anybody. So how do you create warning systems in such challenging conditions when you have governments that don't even do the basic,
How many people were displaced?
In the immediate community, we work with 50,000, but there were 7 other states. This is just a tiny part of...
And how many of the 50,000 went back, like in the Rockaways?
Well, they had no choice. They have to go back. They have nowhere else to go.
Right. We're talking about so many different levels of this problem, right? We're talking about a warning system and the use of mobile, the use of, and we're talking about a very different kind of problem of how do you change the culture and norms and realities, organize the people who go back are effective. And then we're talking about the people who don't even think they're effective, how do you change them? So amongst those pieces, what should we prioritize, right? How do we influence the people in this room who are committed to make different choices about what they're doing, right? It would be nice to think the problem's out here, but if the problem's in here, how can we start to think about some different choices? Do you want to answer that or do you want to say something else? It's coming to you right there.
If you listen to the different perspectives that have been expressed in the room, it's clear that working with communities to become more resilient is a multifaceted endeavor. And so I think that part of the answer to your question is that you have strategies that bring in different that combine and bring together different approaches. But that's really difficult to do for 2 reasons. One, there's a management challenge just to know how to sequence things, and the balance between different types of interventions that you're going to bundle together is not easy to do. So we need work just in the design and management of these more comprehensive and complex approaches. And 2, the funders who back the work of the organizations that do that tend to think of things as much more unidimensional. So one of the things that we could do is try to promote the concept that it's not unidimensional. Resilient communities require more comprehensive, holistic approaches.
Yeah, and you guys know that's not easy to have comprehensive, holistic partnerships, right? That's what you guys are wrestling with, right? There's a general sense and belief that in the next 5 years we can solve many of the early warning signs, that we actually can get big data and get better weather patterns, right? And so there's also a short-termism amongst this community of what we can do, right? The challenge of how do we change the way our communities value resiliency, make trade-offs, that seems to be a longer work that we're still confused even how to talk about, right? You've been wanting to say something, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Olivier Berard from Mana Nature. But I'm going to talk of 20 years I spent in Madagascar. I think they have different approaches, and we have 2 different things we're talking about now. We've been talking about the communities in Colorado, which is sad what happened. But So we're talking about prevention, communication, but we have 3 billion people without internet access around the world. So we cannot have the same approach, to prevent what's happening with communities in the United States and what is happening in Africa. Just a small little example. We have, as it's been said, listened to the people which are used to have cyclones, to have all these big storms, coming to them. In Madagascar, we tried to improve agriculture, and we said people were doing slash and burn agriculture on the hills, and it has a very low yield. So we said, why don't you improve agriculture on the lowlands, because you can have very high yields. And we did with certain communities. But then when a cyclone arrived, you realize that you lose everything on the lower part. And then they lost 20, 30%. But they still had, yield on the hills. So it's two different things. But if we're looking at these very poor people, we have to listen to them. Because they know a lot of the natural things happening. But also we have to bring input. It's not true. You cannot wait in IT for the people to invent, what is the future. You need to have technical inputs. There are trees that are more useful that they don't know there. So we have to do two different things. We cannot have the same approach, for developed country and developing country with isolated people.
Okay. Let's come back to the original question. What would it take for us in this room to have this room be filled next year? What would have to happen?
A disaster before the next annual meeting.
Right? Okay. All right, what else? Right? Because some things we can control. That's not one we can yet control. Back here, comment. Yeah.
My name is Bud Riss, and I'm from Boston. I have a real job, but on the side, I co-chair the mayor's task force on building resilience in the city of Boston. And one of the things, we're trying to take a much more different focused approach in answer to your question, and that is we're focused on the biggest developers, the biggest landowners in the city of Boston along the waterfront, and trying to work with them to show them how they can create more value in their buildings by building more resilience into them. It's a particularly difficult problem with existing buildings versus new structures where regulation is important. But we've seen a phenomenon in Boston where green buildings now have much more value. And particularly the 30-somethings who move into Boston in the high-tech world ask their landlords or ask their building owners, why isn't your building green? I want to work in a green building. I don't need a car. I don't need a garage. So we're trying to add in this resilience as part of the sort of green building approach overall to increase value.
So one of the answers to the question is to get more people in here, we'd have to make the better business value proposition that this is worth doing. And where does that work and where not? Yeah.
It has to cost us. It has to cost us. I mean, if there's no cost in us, if we think that there is no cost in not having resilient communities in other countries, and we only focus on our country, we will.
So what would we have to happen in the year to us understand what the cost is?
Some sort of tax or some sort of it would have to cost us money for us to be involved in it and want to see where we invest money, how we invest money.
Okay. Other ideas? Yeah. Yeah, please.
I would just go. I would go. Just take that idea. I agree with it. I would take that idea slightly more basic and say we need to figure out better measurement metrics for how we understand risk and resilience, and clearly the insurance industry are the leaders here. But that would do a lot of things to incentivize, to unlock the capital markets, to allow us to talk about what the costs and the benefits are in a meaningful way. So that's one big building block, and I would say communication again.
Do you think there's a big gap in that, in terms of where the models are and where the metrics are, or do you think we're close? I mean, I'm surprised you said that, given before that you that metrics and you had the argument, but it wasn't enough. So I'm trying to understand what that gap is from your perspective.
So there are a number. So the weather data is out there, and that's pretty well developed. And we were very, very accurate. The Army Corps, who does the mapping, was very accurate about where the storm surge would come in Sandy. I mean, it was remarkably accurate, right?
Right.
But there are a number of other elements that everyone's alluded to that lead to true resilience. What are those things that keep one failure from cascading and causing further damage, that allow communities to rebound and recover more quickly? That, all of those things, how do we measure that and show progress in terms of making that better? those are the things. And there are a lot of initiatives. I mean, IBM is working on something. There are a number of initiatives led by various elements of the reinsurance. Rockefeller has sponsored some work on this. So we've got a number of different elements, but I think the time is now for consolidation. So we agree on what the gold standard is for some of these metrics.
All right, let's get another comment here. Yep.
Yeah, next year at this session, you announce the winners of the competition that you put out to all the law schools in the U.S. to find out why regulation and law outlaw sustainability in this country in so many areas. Our culture is legal bound, regulation bound, and we have lots of regulations that get in the way of sustainability and resilience. And I would just turn our national law students onto that kind of a investigation and announce the winners here next year.
Yeah. Comment next to you.
Thanks. Real quick, to fill the room, I think if there's specific objectives, there's so many ways that resilience can be improved. But if there are specific goals that would want to be achieved within a year's time or 2 years' time, then I think people will buy in even more and have to stay focused. But we've got to define what success is in a very clearly attainable, measurable way. And unfortunately, I'm not sure it can cover the globe, but you got to pick some spots to win, I think.
Yeah. We saw how much enthusiasm there was to the resiliency tax, right, as a specific thing. Comment, yeah, 2 comments, one then behind you.
Just a comment,
Quickly.
About thinking the insurance industry.
You got to use the microphone.
Just a comment about thinking that the insurance industry and the free market they operate in are going to resolve this problem. There's a big problem and a big challenge in that insurance rates in every state in the nation are regulated by a politically appointed insurance commissioner who's typically appointed by the governor, who needs to be reelected. And the last thing those people are going to do is allow rates to rise to the level that they should be at to let the market, really bear on the problem in the way it should. So one topic is to try to figure out that big political problem.
Right. Take politics out of it, as we can do in a year.
Yeah. I'm Mike Conathan with the Center for American Progress. From my perspective, I think we're still in a place with this conversation where we still need to convince people that it's a problem to a much larger degree. I work I do work in ocean policy, and I work with the fishing industry in New England, for example. And even after years of declining returns for their catch, for their effort, they're still insisting in large cases that the scientific cuts to fish limits are still too high and that they should still be allowed to fish more. And so ultimately what that problem requires, and what I think this problem requires, is greater reduction in scientific uncertainty so that we can get to a point where people are buying in. Because you're dealing with people who are, particularly as we look at developing countries, you're dealing with people who are living on the edge. They need every dollar they can get to live. And so the idea that we're going to come to them and say, we'll pay a little more for insurance and it'll pay off when there's a big problem. They don't have it. Yeah. So until the problem is better defined and better supported by the scientific data, then we're not going to be able to have the full conversation.
Okay, great. We're about sort of wrapping up. We want to do 2 things before we end. There's 2 commitments, as we always do, to hear who's doing some good work, and then I want to come back to original speakers and give any closing thoughts that you have. So, please.
Thank you. Hello again. So Petra Nemkova from Happy Hearts Fund. Imagine you and your family was lucky enough to survive a devastating earthquake. First responders come, they do life-saving work, and then they leave. And you're hoping that help will come and rebuild the school for your children. But the help is not coming. So community puts together all the resources they have. Somebody donates a porch, somebody donates a walls made out of grass, and the windows are the fabric from cement bags. Now the room is very small, dirty, dusty, noisy, and unsafe. 2 years later, same room. 4 years later, 6 years later, the help is not coming, and a generation is lost. By rebuilding safe, disaster-proof schools, it has an incredible ripple effect on empowering children, but also rebuilding safer and more economically resilient communities. It also provides a brighter future for the future generation. And that's what Happy Hearts Fund is focusing on rebuilding disaster-proof schools for children who are forgotten in areas where there is not sustained response. In 2011, we have made a commitment to action to build 10 schools. And by the end of this year, we will celebrate rebuilding of 82nd school in 7 years. But the need is much greater. And that's why we shared our knowledge and we established locally based Happy Hearts Fund Indonesia, where the stakeholders will focus on rebuilding disaster-proof schools and more resilient communities. And we'll build at least 20 schools in the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks.
So to talk about a different type of resiliency, my name is Jim Pickup, and I'm the president of the Middle East Investment Initiative. I'm here on behalf of MEII, as we call it, and our partner, the Center for American Progress, with whom we have developed the Palestinian Political Risk Insurance Project in the West Bank. Originally the idea of President Clinton himself, this initiative created a pilot program for the first ever political risk insurance coverage that protects shipments from Palestinian businesses, manufacturers, and others against losses resulting from the regional security risks. Mitigating the effects of these losses incentivizes Palestinian businesses to seek new markets, increase trade, expand businesses, and hire more workers. We launched this in April. The project is now up and running. It's a true public-private partnership. In addition to CAP and MEII, several CGI members have provided financial, legal, and technical support. The United States Overseas Private Investment Corporation provided financial backing for the project, and the Palestinian National Insurance Company has stepped up to be our on-the-ground implementer. By supporting economic growth and job creation in the Palestinian territories, this project is intended to improve the livelihoods of Palestinians and Israelis. Over time, we believe that the projects such as this, which are win-wins for everyone involved, will build the foundation for a peaceful and sustainable solution to the Middle East conflict.
Thank you. I've asked them and all of our speakers to stay for a few minutes afterwards if you're interested in any of these projects. Winnie, do you want to share any closing thoughts?
Well, I enjoyed the discussion, but I noted that a lot of the discussion was about how markets work to deliver insurance for poor people or not so poor people, because some of the discussion was about the North. For me, the issue of tackling inequalities, redistributing risk, and stopping risk dumping are critical for addressing, if we are to build the resilience of poor people in the developing countries. We cannot look at it as something that's going to be delivered by expanding markets only. It will require partnerships between governments, the private sector, even civil society communities like those we work with, each knowing its role and playing its role according to its comparative advantage. And we will have to work across traditional boundaries of sectors, because this is about, in the case of our project, this is about people's food. It's about their housing. It's about their incomes. It's about transportation. So it's about working across the sectors. And lastly, I gave you that story about the Mozambican woman who asked me whether a woman giving birth in the tree is resilience. Poor people know that risk has been dumped on them, that the fact that their climate is changing and they are unable to predict the weather and grow food and feed themselves is a consequence of global warming that has been caused by people in richer countries. So we need to discuss the issue of development financing. Where are the resources that will help these people who didn't cause climate change, but who are victims of a changing climate? Where are the resources going to come from to help them adapt? Resilience, the core of resilience, really, we are talking about adapting to changing climate, and new resources must be found. And that's, for me, my last thought, that while we look at these projects, we must think about the broader policy implications and development financing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was so inspired by all the comments and the presenters. I just want to leave you with a couple things. For us, small is big. Small is big. You cannot solve the problems without thinking on a micro level. And think about this just from a material science standpoint. I'm a material scientist. The strongest materials are bundles of fibers, or composite materials that are mosaics of tough and strong and stiff materials, right? This is the way we need to be thinking about resilience when we think about communities. The other thing, stop thinking about handouts, thinking about handoffs. Have to engage. The communities have to be part of the solution. They have to acknowledge that they're part of the problem, and they have to own the solution going forward. And the only way that's going to happen is for them to be engaged throughout the whole process. And then the last thing I want to do is plug. We talked a little bit about how can we fill this room. I got an idea. Well, we have to make this bigger than just a conversation between issue experts, policymakers, people in industry, people in NGOs, all well-intentioned, right? This has to hit the public domain. This has to hit mainstream. It has to get in the public consciousness. This evening at 6:30, we're going to be having a reception. I hope you'll come talk to me after the conversation. We're partnering with an online gaming company. Right? We're going to bring this to the mass young folks that are playing games, have it be fun for them to understand what the issue is, give them opportunities to interact and to create solutions. It's a really cool, neat idea. I'd like to talk to all of you about this a little bit more. You're all welcome to the reception.
Where is it?
We're going to be holding it at 508 West 26th Street.
Okay.
And I've got all that information later on.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I have been benefits great deal from all your comments and my colleague presenters. So I'm not thinking I'm in a better position to give you takeaways. But nevertheless, since I'm here, I think mainly three. Number one, human being resilience depends on the resilience of the nature system. We human beings cannot exist without nature. Number two, multiple stakeholders approach and balance between landscape approach and livelihood approach is a key. Number three, as IUCN is branded for sustainable development, this concept has been initiated firstly by IUCN together with UNEP in its report for conservation strategy in 1980. But now, with climate change, resilience, and all the sustainable development, green growth, we come to think, reviewing, rethinking about these past 300 years to come up with the solution. What's the fundamental solution? We have political solution, cultural solution, technology solution, etc. But fundamentally, we should think that the solution based on universal natural law. Thank you.
So thank you for the conversation. Thank you for all the work you do. Thanks for taking some risks between now and next year. See you next time.